Welcome to Truth and Lies Radio, a program dedicated to revealing the truth and exposing the lies about the destruction of your freedom and prosperity and what you can do about it. And now, your host, former Washington right-wing activist, international living, banking and asset protection author and expert, and American patriot in exile, David Finzer.
This is David Finzer broadcasting for the next 2 hours from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad, along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia, on my 5,248th day of voluntary exile across 6 countries in protest from an ever less free America. To join our conversation, you can call toll-free from the United States and Canada at 1-855-888-2292, or for the terminally timid, you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. Also, remember to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. According to the big clock on truthandliesradio.com's FATCA/TaxMageddon countdown page, your taxes will skyrocket and your worldwide financial privacy will expire in 126 days, 11 hours, 15 minutes, and 16 seconds. Well, the big news is the Republicans are having their convention coronation, sort of. But because of hurricane/tropical storm Isaac, everything is sort of a mess. They have released a new 3-day schedule, which they keep on revising, and it's going to, doesn't look like God likes Romney much more than I do, I've got to admit. What they're saying, at least as of earlier today, is that Mr. Romney will be nominated Tuesday, and so will Mr. Ryan, which is a change from the usual. The storm had originally threatened the Tampa Bay area and was forecast to veer west in the Gulf of Mexico away from Florida. Bay Area, the planners, however, decided Saturday to delay the convention start and then had to scramble to shave off some speakers and find new places for others. Primetime speakers this week, including former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and, of course, Representative Paul Ryan, both appearing on August 29, will remain the same as previously scheduled. Some speakers from Monday's schedule will be dropped, like, for example, the governor of the state of Florida, Rick Scott, definitely, and I believe, though they haven't said so, Rand Paul, probably. And that extending the convention to August 31 remains, quote, hypothetical. Some of Monday's speakers will be moved to Tuesday. I suspect part of the convention is going to be roughly like C-SPAN in the House of Representatives, where you have one guy speaking and the chairman and nobody else in the room listening, because the hurricane has made the entire Republican National Convention a snafu. And this is, of course, Romney's first great test before he even tries to get elected president, is to see if he can deal with the crisis of a hurricane. Thus far, I have not been very impressed with what they have decided or the way they've run this. Tuesday evening's program will include remarks by Ann Romney, which I'm sure we could do without, as well as New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, previously announced as the, quote, keynote speaker. Ryan will deliver his acceptance speech Wednesday evening in prime time in the eastern part of the U.S., and Romney's speech will attempt to dominate the final night, but if there are some good reruns on, I suspect that people will be watching them instead. I certainly would be. Now, the Republican establishment has done its best to quell the Ron Paul revolution, at least for 2012, using a mixture that's part charm, like from a snake oil salesman, and a lot of procedural hardball. Mitt Romney's campaign and his allies who control the Republican National Committee have ensured that the Texas congressman will neither speak nor be formally nominated at next week's convention. This is a big win for Romney. He had to win in his own party, and he could have been faced with a rebellion from the Ron Paul crowd if Romney hadn't been the first one to blink and extend an early and diplomatic olive branch to what's become a key constituency. Now, again, this makes me question his ability to be president. What happens when Vladimir Putin, KGB trained, and some think the new Stalin, meets him with an icy stare and demands a key concession? If Romney can't stand up to Ron Paul, who is a 77-year-old member of the United States Congress, how is he going to stand up to the head of the largest country in the world? It's amazing. The libertarian septuagenarian, Dr. Paul, controls the state delegations from Nevada, Idaho, and Minnesota, but a candidate needs 5 states to be officially recognized on the floor. Paul's supporters have made claims to Louisiana, Massachusetts, Oregon, Oklahoma, and Maine, but Romney's lawyers, his mouthpieces, his hired guns, use the rules and negotiating tactics, which most other people would call arm twisting, to peel each one away. The Republican National Committee, all 168 of them, approved a report Thursday by the Romney-friendly Committee on Contests that invalidated the Paul delegates elected in Maine based on irregularities, of course caused by Romney, and voted to split the at-large delegation, effectively depriving Paul of control. Now, it's a marked contrast to 4 years ago, while party leaders, for all purposes, and froze Paul out completely. When we come back, I'll talk about what the Paulistas did yet. As I said, it is a big difference from the last Republican convention in St. Paul, when Ron Paul drew more than 10,000 people to a counter-convention across the Mississippi River in Minneapolis. Now, one thing about Ron Paul, he stands by his principles. When Ronald Reagan ran against incumbent President Gerald Ford, the first appointed president in the history of the United States, Ron Paul was one of just 4 members of Congress to endorse Ronald Reagan's primary challenge against Gerald Ford. So this guy has always stuck by his principles. Even when I haven't agreed with him, I've admired him for his principles. But this detente has been going on with Romney for a while, I think. I don't think while Ron Paul could not bring himself to completely endorse Romney, which is what he said, I think he was playing for his son for the next generation, who is a little more politically savvy. Obviously, as a Tea Party candidate, he came as an underdog and got himself elected as a senator from Kentucky. Now, in what was supposed to be a major win, which may well evaporate, Rand Paul was promised a primetime convention speaking slot tonight. But considering the convention is supposed to go into session for 10 minutes and then adjourn, I'm not counting on that happening. This has been really one of the dirtiest Republican campaigns I can remember. But they did get, Ron Paul's people did get some concessions in the Republican platform, especially when you consider that only 11 out of the 112 platform committee members supported Ron Paul, less than a tenth. They got a few things that were pretty good. The document calls for auditing the Federal Reserve with some caveats, of course. It's a political document, so of course it's going to have caveats. If you don't know what a caveat means a loophole big enough to drive a frigging train through. But nevertheless, they got that in there. It even supports a presidential commission to study metallic basing of the currency, modeled on a similar panel on the gold standard that Reagan created as president. My problem is, of course, if Ronald Reagan, who really believed in it, couldn't get it passed into law, I doubt very much that Mitt Romney, who doesn't believe in it, will do anything about it. It will be one more panel that will issue a report that no one will read and will get quietly shelved. The Paul campaign said it got internet freedom language adopted that is nearly verbatim to an Internet Freedom Manifesto published by the Pro-Paul Campaign for Liberty. And for the first time, amazingly, well, not really if you look at the Republicans in history, the platform has a whole section about the U.S. Constitution. The Polistas also won language opposing the use of domestic drones and protecting private property from being seized unfairly by government. I can't think of very many ways where the government can fairly seize it, but that's, I suppose, another argument. But the Polistas didn't get everything they want. Despite 4 attempts to add support for a ban on the indefinite detention of American citizens under the NDA, that failed. They also lost some skirmishes against social conservatives over civil unions, and the foreign policy section wound up not including restrictions on when the president could declare war as they wished. Now, I don't know how they got stuff adopted on the document, but they couldn't get something adopted on the president declaring war since the Constitution specifically vests the sole power to declare war with the United States Congress. But then that's politics, and nobody's paid any attention to the Constitution except lip service. So, nevertheless, the document could have been a lot more imperialistic, and I use that in the absolutely worst possible meaning of the word, because I'm using it intentionally, without the Polistas being there. Now, Dr. Paul is supposed to stick around tonight to watch his son speak, but of course if his son doesn't, that could change a whole lot of things. And there are still angry Polistas around. Now, what's interesting is the only way that some of the people who were actually really legitimately elected as delegates to the convention in support of Ron Paul could even get into the convention was thanks to the Iowa GOP, which gave them guest passes. Now, what does that say about how small, how rotten the Romney gang is from the beginning? I mean, they can't even be magnanimous winners. I'll tell you, this guy stinks. He doesn't stink as badly as the man sitting in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue does now, but I am not expecting anything good to come out of a Romney administration if it happens to happen. Now, of course, because this is an event of, quote, national importance, the Secret Service running things has called in the FBI, the Coast Guard, and the military, and Tampa has been locked down. And this is to prevent, quote, uprisings from anarchists intent on disrupting the 5-day event. Now, the FBI and Department of Homeland, or Fatherland Security, as I like to call it, issued a joint lack of intelligence bulletin this week stating a high confidence that anarchist groups are preparing to use violence and criminal tactics in an attempt to disrupt the Republican National Convention. I wonder if this is the same high confidence that said that Saddam Hussein had chemical weapons and other weapons of mass destruction before the United States invaded Iraq. I certainly hope not. The police force, the city police force, has increased its bike and horse units with a $50 million federal grant and added more than a half dozen all-terrain vehicles to run across streets, lawns, and everything else to get control of roving mobs as they have at previous conventions. Now, the sole olive branch to this is that the police purchased khaki uniforms, which somebody decided looked less threatening than the regular uniforms they're wearing. But thousands of police from surrounding cities and counties are expected to bolster the local police departments. The Secret Service will be out there in force. The FBI will be there in force. The ATF, the military, they're going to lock Tampa down tighter than, I don't know, tighter than a virgin was locked up in the Middle Ages when her father went away to the Crusades. And I've seen this happen. When George Bush came to Montevideo, Uruguay, they basically took over the city of Montevideo. They landed 2,500 troops. They parked 2 naval vessels on the shore, one of which was right in front of my house and really annoyed me when they kept on the guns kept on tracking me as I moved from room to room. I got a little bit antsy about that. And they locked down 100 square blocks of the city of Montevideo and wouldn't even let Uruguayan officials in. Uruguayan police weren't allowed to carry guns inside that 100-block radius. Now, if they're going to do that in a foreign country, God knows what they're going to do in Tampa. This is going to be just a little example of the way that the American government will handle any future emergency. We've all talked about FEMA camps. We've all talked about illegal arrests. We're worried about the federal government, taking over our states one by one. I think the city of Tampa, God help them, is going to experience that in a small way and get a taste of it during these next few days. Federal officials have shut down a major nearby highway, which is got to be I-4, and positioned floating steel cable barriers in the harbor to stop potential terrorists. That sneaky St. Petersburg militia. I mean, they may sail over there in the Bounty or something and try to attack them in a sailing ship. So this way, they're going to stop attacks from the water. Air and water security zones and traffic restrictions have also been put in place, and an armored truck stands at the ready along with the regional bomb squad. Gee, doesn't that sound like fun? Doesn't this sound like a free country and a way to celebrate the nomination of the man that conservatives have been conned into believing is going to make America freer than Barack Obama has? All you have to do is look at the way he's run his campaign. All you have to do is look at the way he's handling this convention. All you have to do is look at the police presence in this convention. Look at how all of these things are going to be done with absolute total lack of concern for the Constitution and for individual rights. And then you'll begin to get a glimpse of what's going on, and you'll feel a little like the Jews when they were pushed into the ghetto. Well, when we come back, we'll talk about the Democrats and see if they're any better. Well, I've talked about the Republicans, so I guess it's time to talk about the Democrats and their convention plans. For a regime that describes itself as the most transparent administration in history, they obviously don't know what the word transparent means, or their parents never taught them the meaning of the word liar. The folks who have claimed executive privilege over documents in the Fast and Furious case and still maintain that the guy in the White House wasn't involved have decided that transparency is really overrated. They meet with lobbyists in coffee shops near the White House. That way it keeps names of big donors and important lobbyists off the official visitor logs. And they've decided now that we don't need to know who pays for the convention. Even Pravda on the Potomac, the Washington Post, reports, quote, in its marketing materials, the party promises that the, quote, People's Convention will be the, quote, most open and accessible ever, unquote. But the names of donors, some of whom are giving up to $100,000, will remain secret until federal disclosure documents are filed October 15, 6 weeks after the convention has ended, when public attention will have already shifted away from the convention to the election day. Isn't that just wonderful? It's so transparent. It is transparent. It is a completely transparent lie. The party that wants to require outside groups that they don't control to disclose their donors through the Disclose Act, they won't disclose who's cutting checks for their convention until long after everybody's forgotten about it and it can't be made an issue. It makes you wonder just who's cutting those checks and why they don't want the people to know. What I want to know is why isn't the media asking every day the questions about Why won't you tell us? What's the secret? Well, it's a lot like the birth certificate. Why won't they show us? Because they don't want us to see something we won't like. They're undoubtedly getting money from the same big corporations and millionaires and billionaires that they've been demonizing the past 4 years. Democrats hate the rich, except the ones who give them money. Of course, they're the same ones who give the Republicans money as well. And since Mr. Obama has proved to be the most pro-war president, pro-phony war president since Lyndon Baines Johnson got us into Vietnam in a really big way that cost more lives, I think, than almost any war except the war between the states, of course they want to keep it secret. But being a hypocrite doesn't stop there. In President Obama's big acceptance speech is set to be delivered, ready for this, at the Bank of America Stadium. That's right, Bank of America Stadium. This is one of the big banks that's in trouble, that got bailout money, etc. Since he and his fellow Democrats and their Occupy Wall Street allies have spent the whole first term attacking big banks on one side while bailing them out on the other, they've taken to calling it Panther Stadium in all conferences, planning messages and press releases because the Carolina Panthers play there. But if you look at the picture that was broadcast, that we showed you, and we can put up again, I think, it will show you clearly the name of the stadium is Bank of America Stadium. Residents of Charlotte, North Carolina must wonder what Panther Stadium is and why the major bank is headquartered in that city. The one that paid for naming rights of the stadium is persona non grata with the Democrats. But the Democrats don't want to talk about it, just like they don't want to talk about Fast and Furious, just like they don't want to talk about the birth certificate, like they don't want to talk about the Fed. There are so many things they don't want to talk about. One could write an entire encyclopedia starting from A and ending with Z, or Z if you prefer, including all the things the Democrats don't want to talk about. We do know that where they deposit their hundreds of millions of dollars is Bank of America. Of course, they're pledging to move their accounts to the union-owned Amalgamated Bank, but not until after the election, when it doesn't matter. Now, I said as long as they were going to keep on beating up on Todd Akin, I was going to keep on talking about it. And I got to talk about it again today, because the Republicans are still urging him to quit as the party's Senate candidate in Missouri, and he's told them to shove it. Akin's a 6-term congressman and said today he'll continue his campaign to unseat Democrat Senator Claire McCaskill. Now, here is a clear choice for the people of Missouri. Todd Akin is a pro-life conservative. McCaskill is a big-spending feminazi who is so radical in her beliefs on the so-called pro-choice issue, pro-baby killing, pro-birth, pro-abortion issue, that she supports partial birth abortion. Just in case you don't know what that is, that's when they let the baby start to be born and then stick a vacuum tube into its head and suck out its brains and kill it. Now, that's as bad as the communist Chinese, and that's the woman who's running and now is ahead in the polls against Todd Akin. Now, she has been elected despite supporting a barbarous practice that is deserving of being described as Nazi. This is something Dr. Mengele would have loved, and he is being crucified for not using the best possible word. Now, to make it even more interesting, there have been threats of rape against his staffers and his family. Capitol Police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation are investigating at least one threat they deem significant, according to a member of Akin's congressional staff in Missouri, and they have also made threats, like I said, against his family and female staff. The people who do this are sick bastards. And I will bet you that the people behind it are the same people, the same pro-feminazis who have taken what he said when he meant forcible or a real rape and taken the words out of context to demonize this man. The people who are opposing him are the lowest form of scum that I have encountered. They are absolutely beneath contempt. They are beneath they're beneath any consideration at all. And now to threaten his female staffers and to threaten his family shows exactly what they are about. They are about fear and loathing. They are about divisiveness. They are about lying. They are about cheating. They are about force. In other words, they're perfect Obama supporters. Now, very quickly, for those of you who are political junkies and whose favorite spectator sport's not football, basketball, baseball, or hockey, but who are political addicts, I recommend www.270towin.com as part of your daily political fix. It keeps track of the polls on a statewide basis and the likely electoral votes either candidate would receive based on the polls at various times. It's worth looking at. It's very interesting. It'll keep you occupied. When we come back, we'll go from junk to stuff that isn't junk at all and could be really worth something. This is David Binzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Well, gold is money again. Earlier this summer, the Federal Reserve and the FDIC circulated a letter to banks that proposes to synchronize U.S. regulatory capital rules with Basel III. Now, Basel is a city in Switzerland, and Basel III is the third of a series of accords that lays down standards for how much capital a bank must hold in order to safeguard its solvency and overall economic stability. Because, of course, the entire Western status capitalist system is based on fractional reserve banking, which means you lend a whole hell of a lot more money than you have, which is causing a whole lot of problems. Nevertheless, they're trying to improve this. It's a global standard on bank capital adequacy, stress testing, and a market liquidity risk. But here's the important part. At the top of the proposed changes is a new list of what they call, quote, zero risk-weighted items, which now includes gold bullion right after cash. Now, 0% risk-weighted means it's safe. Now, the fact that they still include cash right after, ahead of gold shows that they still have their heads up their anal orifice, because cash, of course, is just paper printed by the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and so I certainly wouldn't consider it a 0% risk item, but nevertheless, it's nice that they finally recognize gold is there, and that's the part to take notice of. If the proposals are approved by regulators, and that seems almost certain since the adoption of Basel III will be, then this is a momentous change for the gold market. Now banks will be allowed to hold bullion in their vaults and count it among their top assets. That by itself would be bullish for the gold price as banks recognize gold's unique characteristics and seek to stockpile more of it. Of course, we're only finding out about this long after they have it, and we'll only find out about the approval after they have found out, so they can get in the market ahead of us and buy it cheaper than we can, so it drives up the price for the common folk, because, of course, the banks are part of the ruling class. Now, it's a good move that people are recognizing that gold exists, but what scares me is also the possibility that they will decide that only banks can hold gold, and that banks will be allowed to issue gold banknotes. And we could have a run like the United States has had in the past when banks held silver, but they issued a whole hell of a lot more silver certificates than they had silver. And since the banks already do that with paper money, why wouldn't they do it with gold? and have everybody conned into believing, gee, we now have real money because it's backed by gold. But try to go in and cash your dollars, your pounds, your euros, your Swiss francs for gold and see what they tell you. I suspect the security guard will be escorting you to the door. Now, speaking of security and security guards, we've been playing security guard in this country called Afghanistan. And we've been doing it for quite a while, and we have been failing at it. There has been an increasing amount of what they call blue-on-green violence, where the people that the Allies, NATO, etc., trains turn the guns on the very people that have been training them. And people are starting to get smart, the United States not being among them. New Zealand, which has always had an independent foreign policy, is following France and South Korea and is now expediting the departure of its 140 soldiers. Now, while I realize that's not end-of-the-world type headline news in the United States, and if you're an American, you probably didn't even know New Zealand was playing a small part in the Afghan war. In fact, you may have hardly known about the part Americans have been playing in a war that over the last decade has repeatedly been labeled the forgotten war. Still, maybe it's time to notice. Maybe the flight of those Kiwis should be thought of as a small omen, even as they are departing as decorously, quietly, and flightlessly as possible. Because here's the thing. Once the November election is over, expedited departure, meaning running like hell, could well become an American term, and the U.S., as it slinks ignominiously out of Afghanistan, could turn out to be the New Zealand of the superpowers. I remind you, as the graphic displayed shows, many, many countries have tried to control Afghanistan. It just doesn't work. It is a mountainous country and everybody has guns. It is an uncivilized version of Switzerland. Switzerland was the only country in Central Europe, only major country, not occupied by the Nazis, or who wasn't on the side of the Nazis, because it had lots of mountains and it had lots of guns. And Afghanistan, there is no reason for the United States to be there. All the United States did was help a new strongman, Karzai, take power after the Soviets had fled. And in fact, the Constitution that was drawn up under U.S. tutelage is nothing that even vaguely resembles an American Constitution. It enshrines Sharia law. They are still doing everything they can to harass, kill, and deport Christians. The Jews have long been gone. You remember they even blew up these ancient statues of huge stone carvings of Buddha. It's not just Christians, Jews they hate everybody. And this is a regime that it's time for the United States to get out of. You know, we have done the best we could. I think it was a mistake probably from the beginning. It would have been better to leave the Russians in there and let them bleed. But nevertheless, President Obama flew to Kabul to seal with President Hamid Karzai a 10-year strategic partnership agreement. And supposedly American troops will remain there until 2020 or beyond. I sure as hell hope not. The American withdrawal regularly mentioned in the media usually doesn't really mean withdrawal. What it means, on paper at least, is that America, for years to come, will continue to partially occupy a country that hates foreigners who won't leave and makes them pay for it. And the problem is the people who are going to pay for it are not going to be the people who sent them, but are going to be American men and women in uniform who served because they wanted to serve their country, because they were patriotic, and they're going to pay with their blood for this stupid strategic mistake that nobody's willing, except like Ron Paul and a few others, are willing to stand up and say was a lousy idea from the beginning and we ought to get the hell out. Now, getting out. It seems like the time has come for the whites left in South Africa to run like hell. Hillary Clinton, of course, the darling of the left, and lately touted as a replacement for the stupidest vice president in history, Joe Biden, has certainly proved herself to be a team player on Obama and the Democrats' policy of division and opportunism in all things racial. She's just completed a trip to South Africa where she discussed numerous issues with Maite Nkoma Mashambe, South African Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, and no doubt a member of the Communist Party of South Africa, as every president of South Africa has been since the whites were taken out of power. Now, the United States has agreed to several initiatives, including a $2 billion declaration of intent between the Export-Import Bank and the South African Development Corporation to provide credit guarantees, a $500,000 opportunity grant program for disadvantaged black South African students, and the collaboration between USAID and the Federal Trade Commission and the Competition Commission of South Africa to provide capacity building assistance for competition agencies. Nothing was raised about the atrocities against the whites. Over 3,000 white farmers have been murdered since 1994. The South African police have not made investigations, and the prosecution of these farm murders a priority, dismissing them as crimes by common criminals. The government has disbanded the commando units of white farmers that once protected their farms and has passed laws to confiscate their weapons. Disarmament of a targeted group is one of the surest early signs of future genocidal killings. We are going to see in South Africa something with the whites that was akin to what happened to the blacks in Hitler's Germany. Now we're at the top of the hour, so I have to go away, but I have a lot more to say today, so stay tuned.
Welcome to Truth and Lies Radio, a program dedicated to revealing the truth and exposing the lies about the destruction of your freedom and prosperity and what you can do about it. And now, your host, former Washington right-wing activist, international living, banking and asset protection author and expert, and American patriot in exile, David Finzer.
This is David Finzer broadcasting for the second hour from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia on my 5,248th day of voluntary exile across 6 countries in protest from an ever less free America. To join our conversation, you can call toll-free from the U.S. and Canada at 1-855-888-2292, or for the terminally timid, you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. Don't forget to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. Some of you have been very nice to me there, and some of you have not been so nice, but I have stood my ground. But I always like to hear from you, friend or foe. I'm not afraid of criticism. I know why I believe what I do. Anyway, according to the U.S. debt clock, the total U.S. national debt is $15,988,506,000,000, which is a debt per citizen of $50,880, but a debt per taxpayer of $139,971. That accounts for all that 49.5% of the people who don't pay taxes. Now, the gross domestic product is lagging way behind. It's over $600 billion behind the national debt. So that means even if they confiscated all of the goods and services sold in the United States in a whole year, it couldn't pay off the debt. And when you add up the total debt owed across the United States, then you have a figure that is just impossible to even imagine. of almost 57 trillion. It's 56 trillion, 978 billion, 788 million dollars. I wish somebody would figure out how many, if you laid playing cards one on top of the other, how high that would reach. I suspect it would knock satellites over if you could get it up that high. Well, normally today would be Money Monday, and my economic co-host Mike Gard would be joining me, but he is traveling on company business, and so he possibly will be back with me next week, or he may get a 2-week hiatus, but I'm still here and have plenty to talk about. Now, of course, he keeps in touch by internet, and that's something that is my very first topic, is the internet. The Federal Communications Commission is looking at a proposal to tax broadband internet service. The move would transfer money to the Connect America Fund, which is a subsidy the agency created to expand internet access. The FCC issued a request for comments on the proposal in April. Dozens of companies and trade associations have weighed in, but the issue has largely been beneath the individual user's radar. If members of Congress understood that the FCC is contemplating a broadband tax, they'd sit up and take notice, said Derek Turner, research director for Free Press, a consumer advocacy group that opposes the tax. Numerous companies, including AT&T, of course, Sprint, of course, and even Google have expressed support for the idea. Now, first of all, I still want to know how the hell the FCC can levy a tax when the Constitution gives the sole right to tax to the Congress. But, why pay attention to the Constitution? Consumers, what you may not already know is you're already paying a fee if you have a landline or a cellular phone to support the FCC's Universal Service Fund. This fund was created to ensure that everyone in the country has access to telephone service, even if they live in remote areas. This has been in place for a long, long time, and so, it's helped make everybody in America connected, which was the idea of it. But nevertheless, it's there, and now they want to do the same thing with internet. Last year, the FCC overhauled a $4.5 billion portion of this Universal Service Fund and converted it, without congressional approval that I can find anywhere, into a broadband internet subsidy called the Connect America Fund. The new fund aims to subsidize the construction of high-speed internet networks to the estimated 19 million Americans who currently lack access. Well, that may be a good thing, or it may be a bad thing, because the internet goes both ways, and maybe there's 19 million Americans they want to know a whole lot more about and track what they're doing, and so that is the reason for this. I never trust a government handout. It always comes with a price. And as Ronald Reagan once said, the nearest thing you'll see to eternal life on this earth is a temporary government program. So if the FCC wants to do it and wants to tax us to do it so that it can get 19 million more Americans hooked up to the internet, then my gut just tells me it ain't a good thing. The government is not an eleemosynary institution. It's not a charitable institution. There's nothing nice about it, especially today's government. It's an ugly monster that wants to know everything about us. And so I would get on the phone to my congressman and tell him, you oppose this and their authority ought to be taken away. When we come back, we'll talk about another way that billions are being drained from your tax dollars. If you're like me, you probably think that controlled immigration is a good idea. It adds new stock to the gene pool. There are workers needed in various categories that should be brought to the United States. But the people who are allowed in on a permanent basis should be only people that add to America's welfare, and the rest should come in on a temporary work visa. But you probably are like me and don't think much of this flow of illegal immigrants who cross the border, come in through Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, California, live for 2 or 3 generations without ever learning the language, get all kinds of services for free, cost the taxpayer millions of dollars, and now it's gotten even worse. Billions of dollars in federal tax credits are now flowing to illegal aliens thanks to a loophole in the tax code that allows them to reap government dollars without even being permitted to work. A report issued last year by the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration estimated claims of $4.2 billion in 2010. Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama projected that through the additional child tax credit, illegal aliens could receive about $7.4 billion this year, more than quadruple what was paid out 4 years ago, and an incredible sum more than the 161 million payout in 2001. So from 2001 to 2012, it's gone from 161 million to 7.4 billion. While illegal immigrants are not eligible for similar tax credits, there's a little glitch in the law that grants them eligibility to receive the child tax credit even if they paid no taxes. The reason illegals are eligible for the credit is because even those that are not permitted to work in the country are expected to file tax returns with the IRS. The IRS would tax everybody, including God, if they could get their hands on him. If the aliens have no Social Security number, or they all have, of course, 17 of them have the same Social Security number, but no legitimate Social Security number, the government gives them an individual tax ID number, which is the same thing as the Social Security number, just by another name, in order for them to file. And despite their illegal status, they still qualify for the credit, which is given to families with children under 17 years old. One of Senator Sessions' aides said the boondoggle is a serious matter that deserves attention and a signal of how Washington is disconnected from reality. I thought understatement was a British characteristic, not one from Alabama. Certainly the people I know in Alabama are not understated. This is outrageous. This is incredible. This encourages people to come in with as many children as they can and get up to $1,000 per child from the United States government, even though they're here illegally and should be arrested and dumped back across the border. Of course, as they figured this out, waves of illegal immigrants have been flooding tax preparation offices to cash in on the tax refund. One person investigating it found that numerous illegal immigrants were claiming tax credits, like I said, up to $1,000 per child, for children living in Mexico, and some of them were even claiming them for their nieces and nephews. He said, we've seen sometimes 10 or 12 dependents, most times nieces and nephews, on these tax forms. The more you put out on there, the more you get back. This scheme has become so widespread that of the 3 million returns filed by illegal immigrants in 2010, more than 70%, that's 2.1 million of them, have claimed the tax credit, and I guarantee that each one was for multiple children. So you add up the numbers, and that's a lot of money. Now, this is what I find fascinating. They are here illegally. They have to have an address to which the IRS can send them their tax number, send them their check. So we know where they are. Why aren't they picked up and deported? They are here in the United States illegally. It is just incredible. For them to do this is a waste of taxpayers' money. It is entirely indefensible. You have one law working against another, and it makes no sense to me There are American citizens starving because the big corporations have destroyed their jobs, have taken away their homes, they're in the streets, and at the same time, people are coming across the border from Honduras and Guatemala and every other rat hole in Central America, and they are getting paid for all the children that they can claim from your tax dollars. This is something that deserves more than just attention. It deserves to be stopped immediately, and the Congress could do it if they chose to, but in fact the Democrats will block it because, as I've said, they try to register illegal aliens to vote as quickly as possible. That's why they oppose voter ID bills. And of course, you know, this is just absolutely crazy. But now I understand why it's crazy, because I found something that I had to read 3 times because I didn't believe it the first time I read it. The Obama Justice Department recruits lawyers with, quote, severe intellectual disabilities, but excludes anyone who's moderate or conservative. Yep. They say truth is stranger than fiction, and that is the case here. A former Justice Department lawyer who publishes at P.J. Tatler has obtained documents from the Justice Department detailing efforts to recruit attorneys and staff who have, quote, psychiatric disabilities, quote, unquote, or, quote, severe intellectual disabilities, unquote. On May 31st, 2012, Assistant Attorney General Tom Perez issued a directive to affirmatively recruit people with these targeted disabilities. In other words, he said, let's go out and look for attorneys who are crazy as hell or are morons, and let's hire them for the Justice Department. Now, DOJ policy does not merely involve prohibitions against discrimination, but the documents reveal the recruitment efforts to hire as attorneys and staff for the DOJ people suffering from mental disorders and intellectual disabilities. Even better, applicants can self-identify their disability by means of the standard Form 256 self-identification disability. I guess if I think I'm a frog, and I've had one of my co-hosts who talks about other kin, people who think there's something other than humans, they would qualify. This is incredible. These are the people who are involved in shaping how justice is administered in the United States, and they're crazy or they're intellectually incapable. Now it gets even better. Those with these targeted disabilities, meaning they're incompetent, may be hired through a non-competitive appointment. That means they get to skip the regular civil service examination and competition from applicants and can just be grabbed out of stacks of resumes and hired immediately instead. According to the documents, those with these targeted disabilities can even be hired before the position is advertised and even before the position's closing date. So in other words, all of the rules are thrown out for crazy attorneys. Of course, I suppose that's the only way they can get attorneys to put out the crap that the Obama administration puts out, is to have crazy ones. I mean, think about this. Would anybody do this in a business? Certainly hire the handicapped if you can for a job that's appropriate. I'm handicapped myself. There are things I cannot do. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending upon your point of view, talking is one of the things I can do, and researching is one of the things I can do. But I have physical disabilities, not mental disabilities, not psychiatric disabilities, and these people are given high government jobs that can affect all of us. I am just blown away. And even after 8.5 years on Capitol Hill, when I saw plenty of silly stuff, this is too much for me to believe. Stay tuned, and we'll talk about this more when we come back, because I have more to say. case you thought I was kidding with the last story, unfortunately I'm not. And what I said was true. Obama's Justice Department is seeking to affirmatively hire, lawyers with psychiatric and intellectual disabilities so severe that they were unable to practice law even for a year. And while it's been doing that, it has at the same time systematically refused to hire moderate, conservative, or libertarian attorneys, even though there are branches of the Justice Department, such as the one that enforces the religious liberties, RLUIPA law, and I have no idea what that acronym stands for, that involve areas of expertise where plenty of qualified conservative lawyers could be found. One radio host claimed that liberalism is a mental disorder. He would no doubt view the Justice Department's hiring of lawyers with severe intellectual disabilities as confirmation of that. I certainly would have to agree. The staunchly left-wing political appointees in the Justice Department plainly view conservatism, or even being moderate, as being far worse than a severe mental disability, since they give preferences to attorneys with mental disabilities but don't hire conservatives at all. Nor does the Justice Department hire apolitical or nonpartisan attorneys. God forbid we should have someone in the justice system who's nonpartisan. In 2011, a former Justice Department lawyer examined the Justice Department's hires and determined that it had hired 113 overtly left-wing lawyers and absolutely zero, a big goose egg, of apolitical or non-left-wing lawyers for 113 positions, including positions involved in litigating the Religious Liberty Statute and other religious liberty laws that are often handled by non-liberal lawyers in private practice. This illustrates that the applicant pool for the position no doubt included qualified applicants whose applications were rejected by the Obama Justice Department on ideological grounds. You know, I've talked about just scratching the civil service and replacing it with people who are on your side, and that the law doesn't allow it. But Obama doesn't worry about about obeying the law, so he's doing it even though the law says he can't. These are supposed to be civil service appointments. They're supposed to be equal, open to all, and in fact, they're not open to those that are most qualified. They're open to those who couldn't get jobs anyplace else because they're wackos or they're stupid. I'm sorry. Those are not nice words. I'm not using politically correct words. Tough. I am communicating, which means to convey the message across as directly and clearly as possible. You know, Obama's Justice Department is hiring idiots and wackos, which may explain the positions they take on an awful lot of decisions. Not one conservative, not one libertarian, not one moderate, not one nonpartisan, not one apolitico, just wackos, leftists, hard leftists, and communists in the Obama Justice Department. This is really going to the edge of being wacko. Well, at least I thought it was. But the Democratic Party as a whole is not just on the wacky edge anymore. They've charged full-blown off the Looney Tunes cliff of radicalism and are currently yelling Allahu Akbar all the way down. They've gone weak-kneed submissive to radical Islamists with the steadfast leadership of Keith Elliston and the guidance of Islamist fundamentalists who's called for violence regularly, Louis Farrakhan of the Black Muslims. Obama and the DNC are indeed staying true to his Islamist radical roots by giving Islam an honored place at the table for their convention in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, Red State reports about how the Bureau of Indigenous Muslim Affairs gained access to the Democratic National Committee is mostly a mystery. Muhammad Hasham Jaber, the executive director, Jibril Hoff, the spokesman, and Captain James Yusuf Yee, the BIMA national representative for the Democratic National Committee, are the only identified members, and each one appears to be connected to U.S. Congressman Keith Ellison, the first Muslim ever elected to Congress and a former supporter of black Muslim militant radical Islamist Louis Farrakhan. Ellison, who attended President Obama's iftar dinner. Now, an iftar dinner is the dinner held after the sun goes down. It's a religious evening meal where they break the fast of Ramadan, because in Islam they do not eat, drink, or smoke from sunup to sundown, and then they break the fast after the sun's gone down with a ritual evening meal called an iftar dinner. He's only the second president to have held an iftar dinner. Interestingly, the first president could not have been farther away from Barack Obama than any other president. It was Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was a deist, and so he embraced sort of all of the religions, and so he did it because America's first ally, oldest ally at that time, very few people know this, was Morocco. And so in honor of a representative of the Sultan of Morocco, Jefferson held an iftar dinner. But I think Jefferson's motives were a little different than Mr. Obama's. Of course, this dinner made the news, and especially when Representative Michelle Bachmann called for him, among others, to be investigated for ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. Whether or not he has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, Representative Ellison is not far from having associates within this BIMA. Jasser points out that Huff sought advice from Ellison before proceeding with his town hall with Representative Myrick. Captain Yee, who will be speaking at the event, appears in BIMA's promotional video for Juma at the DNC, and Juma is a prayer ceremony, quoting Ellison as saying, "If you're not at the table, then you're on the menu." That's sort of scary. That seems to me like a threat. That seems to me to be a hell of a lot worse than Todd Aiken using the term legitimate rape to talk about a rape that really happened. Captain Yee is described by BIMA as a chaplain in the U.S. military and an eyewitness to the unjust treatment of military detainees and prisoners at Gitmo, who was allegedly detained when he took steps to prevent the injustice. However, BIMA fails to mention that Yee was charged by the military with sedition, aiding the enemy, spying, espionage, and failure to obey a general order. Charges ultimately were dropped due to a national security concern about releasing evidence in the case. Well, there's more to talk about the Democratic National Committee and about the Bureau of the Islamic Bureau in the United States, and we'll do that when I come back, because this is something I'm deeply concerned about, the penetration of radical Islamists in America. Yes, you heard right. The Democratic National Convention is going to have a Jummah, an Islamic prayer service. And in a video made by disgraced former military captain Yee, who's the Muslim military captain, the only Muslim member of Congress, Mr. Ellison, said, "If you're not at the table, then you're on the menu," which I can only perceive as a threat. But then nobody's watching his Facebook like they were watching the Facebook of Brandon Rao. Now, it's interesting when you look at the ties that continue and connect the Obama regime to these radical Muslims, because this is the Democratic National Convention, which Obama totally controls, just like Romney controls the Republican Convention. And at this event, we've already said Yee's going to be speaking. Also will be speaking is Hassan Abdallah, who the Bureau of Indigenous Muslim Affairs has no problem admitting was a lead defense attorney for the 1993 First World Trade bombing suspects. Ellison has also appeared alongside Wahai on many speaking engagements for organizations such as ISNA and NAIF, despite both organizations being fronts for the Muslim Brotherhood. If Ellison is the link between the Bureau of Indigenous Muslim Affairs and the Democratic National Committee, then can it be said not only does he not mind the questionable associations within the organization, but also the other speakers they will be bringing in? The Democratic National Convention will begin August 31st, run through September 1st, with a focus on Islam. Jummah at the DNC will begin on August 29th. 20,000 Muslims are expected to be in attendance. This is according to BMO, led by one of the unindicted co-conspirators in the World Trade Center bombing. The DNC has come full circle since 9/11, and they're now embracing the enemy from within, the radical Islamists. I'm not talking about your average, everyday Muslim who goes to work, does his job, leaves you alone, and is a good citizen. They are embracing radical Islam in their hatred of America. Have you ever seen a more clear demarcation between good and evil? I haven't. Meanwhile, the Grand Imam for Jummah at the DNC is none other than Sarai Wahai. Wahai is one of the most sought-after speakers on the Muslim fundamentalist circuit and has addressed audiences all over the country. In 1991, he was even the first Muslim to give an invocation to the U.S. Congress. Now, I have no problem with that. I remember when Ben Lighthorse Campbell, senator from Colorado, as a Native American, American Indian, he brought in an Indian medicine man to invoke the Great Spirit. And I think in the spirit of American diversity, that was a great thing. And I have no objection to a Muslim imam doing that. I object to the choice of one who is a radical fundamentalist who hates everything for which America is supposed to stand. After 9/11, his renown as a moderate Muslim grew when he declared, "I now feel responsible to preach, actually go on a jihad against extremism." Unfortunately, his words have not matched his actions. Now, let's look at what the issues are going to be that are covered at the Democratic National Convention. You ready for this? Think about the things Republicans are going to talk about. And I have no brief for Romney, as I think I made very clear in the early part of the show. But they're going to talk about Islamophobia, anti-Sharia. You know, why aren't the feminazis out demonstrating against Sharia? Sharia says it takes the testimony of 2 women to equal that of 1 man. That women should not be allowed to drive cars, they should wear these funny outfits, etc. Where are the leftists? Where is the feminazi caucus? There. The Middle Eastern crisis, the Patriot Act, the National Defense Authorization Act, and more. But I'm sure they will not cover the fact that our government and our military have been infiltrated by radical Islamists, just as the administration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt was infiltrated by Soviet agents. Or that the president's concerns and sympathies so obviously lie with Islam to the exclusion and persecution of Christians and especially Jews. Or that Israel's being treated like garbage by Obama and his minions, and that Israel certainly does not have our government support in a conflict with Iran or other radical Islamist nations, even though they have all said they're going to wipe Israel from the earth in a new Holocaust. Radical terrorist plots within America's borders by Muslims will also not be covered. Neither will the spread of Sharia law and its implementation in direct conflict with the U.S. Constitution. What is evident from this just disgusting elevation of Islam at a political convention is that Islam, especially fundamentalist Islam, I'm not talking about peaceful Sufi Islam, is much more of a political system than it is a religion. And this is by an administration that goes out of its way to attack Christians wherever it can within the United States. The fundamental problem that I have with Islamic fundamentalism is that it teaches that there is no such thing as personal freedom, that everything is preordained by God, and you cannot create a free society on a culture that denies the very existence of freedom. Now, this is also a fundraising event, of course. Each Muslim who attends is being asked to donate between $500 and $10,000. Even Judy Jasser, MD, founder and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, has expressed serious concerns over this. If this were the movie Miracle on 34th Street, and I were the attorney that had to prove that Obama was a Muslim, it would be pretty easy. His background, of course, the history says he was a Muslim. His school records in Indonesia says he was a Muslim. He's refused baptism, even though he says he's a Christian. He's never become baptized, so he's not a Christian by my standards or by the standards of most Christians. But the DNC is so entirely obsessed with their belief in this multiculturalism that they have welcomed with open arms Islamist extremists that declare that America will fall unless America accepts their version of the Islamic agenda. They've asserted that, quote, if only Muslims were clever politically, they could take over the United States and replace its constitutional government with a caliphate. Remember, caliph is commander of the faithful, sort of in a bizarre way, the Muslim pope. It's like those who embraced Hitler or Stalin, the American Nazi Party, the American Bund. The DNC has embraced hate and national suicide, and they're thrilled about it. Of course, there's an old saying, if you believe in nothing, you'll fall for anything, and I guess maybe that describes the DNC. The DNC has listed the Islamists attending the DNC function as typical of the DNC community. Well, if this is typical of the DNC community, then I'm sure as hell glad I'm not a Democrat. It's, pretty bad when my choice for religious choice for president of the United States, in the two major parties, neither of them are nominating a Christian. Be nice to have at least one Christian running for president. To do that, you have to go to one of the third parties. If this is true, what they say that the Islamists, radical Islamists, are part of the typical of the Democratic Party, then the Democratic Party is not the party that our parents knew, or I even knew as a young man when we had conservative Democrats. It's now a thoroughly subversive enemy from within and a serious threat to our nation. It is not the Democratic National Committee that existed of even Hubert Humphrey or Gene McCarthy. This is something new. I mean, to those who believe that Romney and Ryan are going to save us are fools. The Democratic Party, they've been conned because they're big government people. The Democratic Party is worse. I, again, will go back to what I've said all along. You were given two bad choices. The lesser of two evils is still evil. I denounce in the strongest terms both the Democrat and Republican nominees and suggest that you concentrate on Congress and concentrate on defunding all of these evil programs. Take the power back to the American people through the Congress. If you don't, you'll be sorry. Remember, you only have three choices: give in, fight back, or get out. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio.